all right. We need to stop attacking Nigel Farage. We need to cut it out. Please stop attacking him.
We're talking about Nigel Farage.
Labour and Conservative politicians saying that Nigel Farage is not fit for public office.
Nigel Farage has painted a picture. We have to seize that political megaphone back off Nigel Farage.
It is shocking that Nigel Farage chooses to align himself with Putin. It's a disgrace that this man aspires to sit in Parliament.
Because every single time that you criticise Nigel Farage, they're talking about me again. I am winning. Go Farage!
You're giving out these Lego models of Nigel Farage. That's him dressed as Donald Trump. I mean, this guy is living rent-free in your brain. He's got 5 MPs, you've got 72. Why are you bothering about him?
Because he's a threat to our country.
He's loving it.
Good morning. Funny, isn't it? You know, when I came here 17 years ago, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
With his big, goofy grin, even if you just think about him, he's won. Like, honestly, sit in the corner and don't think about Nigel Farage. Try it. He's brilliant, isn't he? And I'm going to do this video about Nigel Farage without thinking, or at least trying not to think about Nigel Farage. That is very hard. You know what? What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to call him by a different name. Clive Garage. Yeah, garage, not garage, garage. Yeah. Because the thing with Clive Garage is that every single time someone goes on television and calls Clive Garage a hypocrite or tries to tear down the man in the suit, they are playing a game that Clive Garage has already won. Pointing at him and calling him a hypocrite implies that people vote for Clive Garage because they believe in him as a person, or they believe in his politics, or that they think he's the best man for the job. But they don't. Because the logic of mainstream politics is to go head to head with your rival and try and beat them on logic, facts, evidence, or on their clear and present hypocrisy. Look, he's a wrong 'un. Oh, that didn't work with this guy. Look, he's embezzling money. Oh, that didn't work either. Oh, look, he hasn't paid his stamp duty. That doesn't work. That worked for the other person. Angela Rayner didn't pay stamp duty, or there was a suspicion that she might have tried to not pay it, or not the higher rate, and she goes. The next day, people point out that Brexit did not deliver on the promises. His support goes up. People point out that Brexit increased immigration by a huge factor, a ridiculous factor. His support goes up. They point out that he's appeared on Russian state television. His support goes up. They point out that Jeffrey Epstein loved him. He's in the Epstein files 40 times. His support goes up. Why is that? Why is that? Why is it? Because the rules of the game, the politics game, which is essentially argue the facts, expose the contradictions, expose the scandal, win the debate, those rules do not apply to Clive Garage. And the reason those rules don't apply isn't that his voters are stupid. It's that his voters aren't playing that game either. They're not voting for policy platform. They're not doing a cost-benefit analysis of trade arrangements. What are they doing? Well, they're doing something that's completely rational. They are reading the real world, because the real world says nothing that has been offered to us in the last 45 years has worked. Our lives are getting worse. We keep voting for people who offer change, and we keep getting the same lack of change. So we've stopped evaluating politicians on outcomes, and we've started evaluating them on whether they seem to understand why we're angry. And Clive Garage understands why they're angry, or he performs understanding at least. And in a system that has spent 45 years managing decline while insisting that it was progress, the performance of understanding is way more important and valuable than ineffective competence. It is actually a rational adaptation to a system that has consistently failed to deliver anything for them other than decline. So the question is, Why has it failed? Because Nigel Farage is a product, and every product needs a market, and yep.
You just said Nigel Farage.
Ah, bollocks. Clive Garage. Yeah, it's a good spot. So Clive Garage is the product. Man, I keep saying Nigel Farage. No, I keep saying his name by accident. If I do, I'm going to bleep it out for now. But yeah, Clive Garage. So Clive Garage is the product, and every product needs a market, and the market that Clive Garage sells to is real. It was constructed systematically over 4 decades by governments of both parties who made choices that they thought were correct but were catastrophically wrong for the majority of people. But they're 100% right for the people that, say, for example, were in the upper income brackets, or the people that were lucky enough to be able to buy their houses. Yeah, it worked for them. But for everyone else, not so much. So let me give you the shape of it quickly in numbers. In 1979, the UK was close to its most equal point in modern history. The Gini coefficient, the standard measure of income inequality, was 0.26. By 1990, it was 0.34. That's the steepest rise in inequality Britain has seen in the entire 20th century in a single decade. In a single decade, we went from being one of the more equal developed economies to one of the least equal in Europe. And that number has never come back down. How did that happen? Well, the theory was called trickle-down economics. Cut taxes on the rich, reduce regulation, and the wealth will trickle down to everyone else through jobs, investment, growth.
Over her 11 years, the gap between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% in this country has widened substantially.
That's right.
How can she say at the end of her chapter of British politics that she can justify many people in a constituency such as mine being relatively much poorer off, much less well housed, and much less well provided than it was in 1979? Surely she accepts that is not a record that she or any Prime Minister can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is the Liberal policy. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
From 1979 to 1988, the top rate of income tax was cut from 83% to 40%. And present Conservative and Labour and Democrat and Republican parties have been running that policy for 40 years and still are. The theory has now been tested across 4 decades and 18 countries, and the results are in, okay? So in 2020, an LSE study found that major tax cuts for the rich had no significant effect on GDP growth or unemployment across 18 wealthy nations over 5 decades. What they did do, though, is increase inequality. Nothing trickled. In fact, it's the most downloaded paper in the history of that database. By the way, it's done by LSE by 2 people called Hope and Limburg. Yeah, Hope in limbo, more like. Yeah? Hi. Okay. And then also the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Not exactly a hotbed of radicalisation. What? Those dreamers at the IMF live in the real world, mate? Oh, you do. You actually created the real world financially. Okay, so the IMF published a report in 2015 and found that when income share to the top 20% increases, GDP growth actually declines. More money for the rich makes economies grow more slowly, and the rewards when they do grow, go directly to the top. And here's the sickening part. The Thatcher government knew it wasn't working. Declassified records show that ministers systematically suppressed the publication of inequality statistics in the 1980s and actually intervened in official poverty measurements to prevent them from showing how badly the experiment was failing. Because they weren't just wrong, they're actually hiding how wrong they were. But why are people voting for this Nigel Farage fella? But why are people voting for this Clive Garage fella? I mean, I don't understand why they'd be doing that. I mean, it's almost like they don't trust us. I mean, why wouldn't they trust us? I mean, oh, hang on. So at the same time, 13.2 million workers were in trade unions in 1979, which is 53% of the workforce. The unions were the mechanism through which workers negotiated their share of productivity growth, right? So when productivity goes up, wages go up. Whole industries that were heavily unionised at the time, steel, coal, shipbuilding, printing, the docks, were all systematically dismantled because they had bargaining power, and bargaining power was inconvenient. And this is where efficiency comes in. Today, union membership is 6.4 million, 22% of the workforce. In the private sector, it's 11.7%. Because as unions went down, inequality has gone up. And that's not a coincidence, it's a mechanism. And at the time, there's also housing. Right to Buy transferred social housing into private hands and prevented councils from using the proceeds to build replacements. 2 generations later, and home ownership between 25 and 34-year-olds has fallen from 55% in 1996 to 34% today. The average English house now costs 8.6 times the average national income, and that's up from 4.4 in the 1990s. 1 in 5 UK tenants spends more than half their income on rent. And the final stat, which is probably the most damning of this entire story. In 2010 to 2011, the Trussell Trust distributed 60,000 emergency food parcels. In 2024 to 2025, 2.89 million, a 48-fold increase in 14 years. Over 1 million of those parcels went to children. Food banks didn't exist at scale in Britain before 2010. We've normalised them, right? So completely that a former Prime Minister could tweet a photo of himself volunteering at a food bank without any apparent awareness of the irony of that fact. What bigger sign do you need that it's not working, right? That a former Prime Minister is volunteering at a food bank. Guys, I did my job really well. Yeah! And these were all choices made by people in suits and justified with economic language. It's just the way of the world. Trickle-down economics. The economy works. The market forces are the order of things.
An astonishing recovery for the party and a tribute to the single-mindedness with which this man has pursued the aim of making his party acceptable and electable.
A new dawn has broken, has it not? And it is wonderful.
Tony Blair's government won in 1997 on a wave of hope of actual change.
I have decided to cut the rate of corporation tax by 2%, from 33% to 31%, the lowest ever rate in the United Kingdom.
And then it maintained Thatcher's economic settlement and kept her trade union laws substantially intact, and actually continued privatisation and further deregulated banks in a way that directly contributed to the 2008 crash.
We Conservatives changed Britain for the better, and we helped to change the world, bringing liberty to millions who'd never have known it. Moreover, let's admit it, we've changed our opponents, at least on the surface, and so made them electable.
That Labour government embraced the City of London as the engine of British prosperity, concentrating wealth in a way that hollowed out everywhere else. In fact, Peter Mandelson said he was intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich as long as they pay their taxes. But of course, many of them didn't pay their taxes and found loopholes. Because here's the psychological mechanism underneath that leads to Clive Garage. When Labour accepted their opponent's framework, when you say implicitly, yeah, there is no alternative to this economic model, we'll just run it more kindly, I guess, you don't win the argument, you legitimise the harm. You tell people that being hurt by this is actually just the way of things. It's the natural order of things. Sorry, I can't do much about that. But I tell you what, once I've stopped being Prime Minister, I'll go and help out a local food bank and that'll maybe help. Maybe I can do that, but there's not much else I can do, I'm afraid. Sorry, it's just the markets working exactly as they should. They have done for 40 years, so it's just the way of things. Yeah, I know. Have you tried budgeting? And when the natural order of things keeps hurting you, and the party that was supposed to be on your side keeps telling you it's working as you're being punched in the face by the economy, you don't get angry at the natural order of things. Clive Garage taps in to what we feel. You get angry at the people who told you it was working, which is exactly and inevitably the gap that Clive Garage has seen and walked into while holding a pint. Oh, is that some anger and frustration there? Oh, actually, I don't mind if I do. Nobody else was utilising it? Oh no, you can't. You caused it. Okay, well, I'm just going to just might harness that. Just put a saddle on it and ride it up to Opportunity Creek, if you don't mind.
I believe in my 35 years of being involved in current affairs and politics, I have never seen a time when our political leaders and most of our mainstream media have been more out of touch on their reflection of an incident than they've been over the course of the last 3 days.
And here's where the psychology and actually the neurobiology really comes in. Because Clive Garage also takes advantage of a very well-studied psychological mechanism. In the 1960s, the psychologist Martin Seligman ran a now famous experiment. He exposed dogs to electric shocks that they couldn't escape or avoid. Then Seligman gave these dogs the opportunity to escape, and they didn't try. They'd learned through repeated experience that nothing they did made any difference. It's called learned helplessness, and the theory stood for 50 years. And then actually Seligman's own graduate student Stephen Maier looked at what was actually happening in the brain and found that the original theory was true but backwards. Passivity in response to prolonged adverse events is not learned. It's the default, the unlearned response. What has to be actively learned is the belief that your actions can make a difference. Hope is the learned behaviour. Apathy is the default. The brain doesn't produce helplessness in response to repeated, uncontrollable harm. It reverts to it. Helplessness is where it was already going. What you have to work to create, and can only create through repeated experience with actions that produce results, is agency. Now think about what 45 years of managed decline does to a community. Job losses, wage stagnation, no housing, no union, no power, and a sequence of governments that all speak the same language and deliver the same tepid outcomes. The brain doesn't produce rage in response to that. It produces withdrawal. It stops evaluating long-term consequences and starts responding to whoever acknowledges the pain. And then a man with a pint appears and says, I know, it's all bollocks, isn't it?
I suppose I like a pint and I've got a sense of humour. Oh. And maybe that's what some of the young people like. I mean, God forbid, I know, isn't it terrible? I'm real.
He's not offering a solution. He's offering permission. Permission to stop pretending the system works. Permissions to vote in a way that isn't about outcomes, mostly because outcomes have been a disappointment for so long that outcomes are no longer what it's about, because outcomes are always shit. And of course, the cruel irony is that Clive Garage's politics will actively increase the helplessness, that he's going to weaken unions, oppose public investment, align with the billionaires who benefited the most from the model that created the problem. But that's not what he's about. He's about the anger. Clive Garage's policies are not the policies of working class empowerment, and the last 40 years have clearly shown that. And what Clive Garage wants to do is just to run those policies harder.
We will become the most pro-business, pro-entrepreneurship government that has been seen in this country in modern times. And perhaps it's appropriate that this speech is being given in this magnificent old banking hall right here in the heart of the City of London. Financial services are Britain's biggest industry, but what sad decline we are currently in. We have an EU rule book that is almost entirely in place, and that is interpreted by massively overzealous regulation. There is, of course, one booming sector here, though. That is HR and compliance. The FCA now incredibly have 5,000 staff. It was 2,000 staff when I left the city just over 20 years ago. And still we carry on with our outdated practices. We still have stamp duty on share transactions and wonder why IPOs and stock trading in London is in such serious state. So our aim would be to sensibly deregulate a rule book that was written for the European Union, not written for the City of London.
Well, if punching you in the face isn't really working, maybe I need to kick you in the bollocks as well. Maybe that's, punch in the face, kick you in the bollocks. I think that might help. That might get rid of the toothache. But as a voter, if you've already concluded that nothing makes any difference, the long-term consequences of a political choice are less important than the short-term relief of having your pain acknowledged. Because Clive Garage is harvesting the distrust that he didn't create. 100% didn't create. Nothing to do with that. He's just harvesting the distrust that was already there because the abandonment was already there. And it explains why Clive Garage cannot be attacked head-on. There's a concept in economics that's relevant here, and it's called inelastic demand. And it means that no matter what happens to the product, no matter how the price changes, no matter how many scandals or how many broken promises, the customers don't leave. Apple has it because it's a part of somebody's identity. They're an Apple user. Coca-Cola has it because you just like the idea of a Coke. Pepsi, who the f*** drinks Pepsi? Football stadiums have it. That's why you just have to pay the prices, because you need to go and see your team. You can't get it anywhere else. And Clive Garage has it. Inelastic demand. And you build inelastic demand not through quality, but through identity. The product stops being the product and starts becoming a symbol, an identity, a way of saying who you are and who you are not. And at that point, attacking the product is counterproductive, because every single attack on the product strengthens the identity of the person that likes that product. Every single time a journalist calls Clive Garage a hypocrite, the people who feel that he speaks for them, what they hear is, these people think I'm an idiot. And they get angrier. And the demand gets more inelastic. This guy understands me, those don't. This is what the people that keep trying to debate Clive Garage on the facts cannot seem to understand. He is not competing in the market for policies. He is in the acknowledgement market. Acknowledgement of genuine structural pain is something that the mainstream parties have been catastrophically bad at providing, which is why everyone is leaving. You can't argue Clive Garage on politics. Like, opposition politicians point out that Brexit hasn't delivered. His voters don't care that Brexit hasn't delivered. They weren't voting for Brexit as an economic policy. They were voting for Brexit as a statement that their voice counted for something. In fact, fuck everyone that was doing all right pre-Brexit. I'm not, and fuck them. Which is why it didn't reduce support for him. It actually increased it. The mechanism worked even when the outcome didn't. So what do you do, right? Not how do you stop Clive Garage? That framing has failed every single time, and it will keep failing because it is aimed at the wrong target. You cannot win against Clive Garage by bringing down his character or convincing the people who support him. You can only win by bringing down the gap in the market that he fills. Deplatforming or fact-checking doesn't work that way. Pointing out that he went to Dulwich private school when he was a kid for £25,000 a year, that doesn't give someone in Middlesbrough a pay rise. None of it closes the gap. The gap has to be closed by the thing that created it, which is a set of economic and political choices being replaced by a different set of economic and political choices. Well, what does that look like? We have working models. For example, countries with high union density have lower inequality and higher wages. Countries that invest in social housing have fewer housing crises. Countries where the gap between the richest and the rest is actively managed through progressive taxation, collective bargaining, public investment, they are more equal, they're healthier, they're more socially cohesive. Germany, Denmark, Norway. These aren't utopias. They are functioning economies with considerably less food bank usage than the United Kingdom. So yeah, the alternative to what happened turns out was a different set of choices. And it still is. Keir Starmer, at the time of writing, has described his economic philosophy as believing that handouts from the state do not nurture the same sense of self-reliant dignity as a fair wage. And that sentence, Margaret Thatcher could have delivered without changing a single word. The inequality gap is still open, and someone is filling it. And that someone is Clive Garage, because that's where he lives, like a troll in the inequality gap. Close it. That's the economics of it. Thanks for watching. I don't like closing like that.